Hello and welcome to another one of the series of In Conversation With. And I'm delighted to have with me today Melissa Ciummei, who you may know has become kind of well-known figure within the world of finance and sort of commentary on what is happening within sort of the global economy. So I'm going to let her sort of introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her background before we get into the conversation. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. I kind of came at this very early on at the start of lockdown. I had seen what was happening in economics, so I did study economics, but luckily I managed to escape without being indoctrinated and learning anything in the system. I became very interested in everything that's going on around 2008 when the shadow banking collapsed in 2019. That's when I seen that something had to happen, because in 2008, the economy actually collapsed, and everything that's happening now was anticipated to happen in 2008. They just managed to kick the can down the road with QE. In August 2019, BlackRock anticipated a crisis and suggested what is happening right now as a solution, inflation, etc., as a solution, and particularly central banks going direct. Then 1 month later, you had the shadow banking crisis. That's when the money printing needed to start. So they needed a reason to peg that on, which was then 1 month later, you had Event 201 and the pandemic and the lockdowns. So for me, I came out early on with a video. Lockdowns do work, not stopping the spread of a virus, but they do work at destroying economies.
Yeah, I'd be very much inclined to agree with you. And it was funny that there was sort of a practice for a pandemic. I think it was either a year or 6 months before it actually happened, which was a very bizarre coincidence. I personally, I think it's a mixture of what you say, the economic control, but I also think it was a test of how gullible, how malleable people are, to see how much they can get away with in terms of coercion and this idea of mass formation, where you kind of herd everyone in a certain direction and see how many people are foolish enough to jump off the cliff.
Well, I spoke to so many people during it, saying that you don't have to get it to take part in the clinical trial, and they felt that they did. They were coerced into it. The idea was you didn't have to get it, only if you wanted to go to work, if you wanted to socialize, if you wanted to travel. Other than that, you didn't have to get it. And I identified that as a gateway to digitalization, which is what the Great Reset is. It's digitalizing everything. And that's what the passes were about. The COVID passes, because Pfizer have now come out and said that it was never about reducing transmission, which we all knew at that time. So what was the point of all these passes? So the jab won't stop it, but the passes will. They need, in order for their new system to come in, CBDC, prior to that, they're going to need everybody to get a digital ID. So that was creating the psychology of we need a pass to access society. And that's where we're moving now. Next step is getting everybody on board with the digital ID and then connecting that to the source of their power. They have the monopoly on money, introducing social and carbon credits, and it's totalitarian control, individual monetary policy of every citizen in society throughout the world. And every country is in lockstep with CBDC.
I don't know if you've seen reports about the UBI and the supposed, if you take the $2,000 a month, then you have your UBI, you get your little RFID put in here, and you have access to everything. But of course, the cost of that is um, they have complete oversight of every single thing that you ever do. If you go to the toilet, they'll know about that even.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I suppose as they roll out more and more of the robotics and more jobs disappearing, I think, would you agree that they're kind of hoping that people will like the idea of having this basic income and be prepared to just sort of give up their freedom just to get this bit of money trickling in?
My thing with UBI, it's with Facebook, they would make changes across the board and they would get backlash. So what they figured out was introduce the changes to 5% of the population and that was using it, their 5% of their users, and then the next month another 5%, and then the next month another 5%. That way people couldn't band together and object, and it happens slowly. That's what they're kind of doing with the UBI. The truth about UBI, it sounds great that robots are going to make everything, and the rest of us will just get to stay at home and be given money to buy stuff from the robots and express ourselves through the medium of dance or whatever we're supposed to do. The reality of the situation is, if I could wave a magic wand and give everybody £1 million tomorrow, the first thing that's going to happen is that majority of people aren't going to go to work. And if you don't go to work, you don't produce, but people are going to continue to consume. If you don't produce, you can't consume. Eventually, there's nothing left to consume. So ultimately, where UBI ends up with is, okay, you need to go to dig that ditch. I don't want to dig the ditch. Well, then you don't get access to society and you don't get your UBI, because the computers and it can replicate humanity in small areas, like say in factories. But could I say to a robot, go out and dig a hole over there? It's not at that stage. It's nowhere near that stage yet. So they're still going to need the humans to do that. What they're actually doing right now is harvesting all our data in order to program the AI. The AI needs more and more information in order to replicate what being a human is, excluding a moral compass and a soul.
Yeah, some of the stuff is in progress. Like I've seen there's various robots that can build block walls, but they can't build an entire house. And there's robotic burger cookers. They can the burgers, but they don't know how to, make the fries or go and serve the customer. So all that stuff is coming, but it could be 5 to 10 years away. So I would imagine this, that it's kind of, here's the carrot now, and then the stick is coming a bit later on. We'll all discover what the stick is once we've all signed up. So I think it's really nefarious, and it does sound like a great idea, that a guaranteed income, but the price we're all going to pay for this is so horrendous. I think people really need to know what they're getting into. It really is selling your soul to the devil, so to speak, as far as I can see. And they've got it all sewn up. I think from what I've heard, the WEF, the World Economic Foundation, want universal basic income, but they also want the Chinese style credit system, because Klaus Schwab has gone on about how great Jinping is, and the Chinese system. Do you think that's what they ultimately want to do, is copy their system?
Absolutely. Klaus Schwab has come out and said China is the model, and there is a transition right now that was, I think it was in Our Common Future in 1979, a UN report that spoke about this, that power would be taken away from the polluting West and go to, I think it specified China and India. And lo and behold, now China came into the World Trade Organization, which is who actually controls corporations that actually control government. And now there is a transfer of power moving to the BRICS nations, who are meeting on, I think, the 22nd of August. And there is talk around them announcing, I don't know if it's going to be this year, but there's definitely a lot of chatter about them releasing their own currency. And when that happens, that is the that's a nail in the coffin of America with the dollar as reserve status. So there's a move of power away. They account for over half the global population, because it's not just the BRICS nations. There's more and more. It's they're adding, as we're adding letters to sexuality, they're adding letters to what is BRICS nations, and they're growing faster than we are.
Yeah, I read there's something like 40 countries interested in joining their coalition.
One
So,
Saudi Arabia.
do you think it's going to be a gold-backed currency?
I don't think it's going to be exactly gold-backed. I think if China wanted to weaponize a currency, all they would have to do is announce their true gold holdings. I think what it's going to be is either a basket of commodities priced in per gram in gold, or a basket of commodities anchored with gold. Because the thing about commodities is it's quite difficult, because they're constantly being used. So it's difficult to get an exact amount to keep things in balance and check. So what gold provides is an anchor to that. And there, if you look, Putin did tether the ruble to gold. It was like a 3-month window that he tethered the ruble, and that was kind of a shots fired of what they're capable of. So that's a strong possibility. Right now, they're moving away from using the dollar for world trade. So it's already happening.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of time before they announce their own currency.
I think that's been on the cards. I remember as far ago as 20 years ago, people were talking about the demise of the dollar. And I suppose they've managed to keep it at bay. I suppose the quantitative easing. I mean, look at Japan, the same thing, and they've got this crazy sort of disinflation going on there. Their economy. I remember back in the 90s, a friend of mine went over there. He got a job for a year. And Japan was like the place. It was amazing. And suddenly they went from being like this incredible sort of beacon of economic prosperity to, we hear about the lost decade and all that kind of thing. And they're still really fairly screwed as far as I can see. It's obvious to me that if everyone keeps going down this QE road, it's a matter of who's going to hit the bottom first, not a matter of are you going to go down, but who's going to go down first. It's interesting that a few economies are not in that boat. Like, for instance, Russia, I think they've got a debt of 30 or 35%, as opposed to 110%, 120. Greece is not the only basket case anymore, is it?
No, that's it. The debt to GDP is getting to the figures now where the debt becomes, you can't repay the debt once it gets so high. With America, just go back on that, the reason that America kept dollar reserve currency status was the move to the petrodollar. There was a 50-year deal with Saudi Arabia when it came off the gold standard in 1971, which is when the WEF was founded. So there was awareness when all currencies became fiat that every fiat currency fails and there had to be a new system put into place. But Saudi Arabia are on the list to join BRICS, and they have now announced that they'll be doing a 50-year deal with China to provide fuel to China. So there is numerous attacks on America, and they are founded due to the abuse of the dollar. The concept would have worked quite well if there wasn't such mass abuse, and the abuse was exposed in 1971 when France sent in the ships to get the gold, and they were forced to take it off the gold standard.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't realize about the that new deal, 50 years with China, is very interesting. It kind of makes me think of the various points where the currencies have changed. Like you had the Dutch, you had the Spanish, and then you had the British, and then you had obviously the Americans. So certain point, one empire is coming down, the other one's coming up. So this is very clearly that process happening with China. So I'm wondering, is it going to be like the corner dog syndrome where America just is going to lash out and, send elder troops to Taiwan and try and screw? I mean, China, they remember the Opium Wars, that was like the total destruction of China back in 1840 to about 1860 odd. They were just destroyed, and it carried on going down, down, down until Mao Zedong kind of turned things around in, well, obviously in a very horrific way. But he began the process of rebuilding China very much by getting rid of all the drugs, because that whole China was full of drugs from 1840 onwards. Now it's quite ironic that America's full of drugs, and they're coming down and China's coming up. One of my fears is like some lunatic in the Pentagon is just going to kind of send the army over and start attacking the Chinese. I mean, do you think that's realistic, or is that just?
That's what the threat is. Nancy Pelosi went over to Taiwan, and there was a big hoopla about that. But I mean, they're losing in Ukraine. They're purporting to be winning, but they're not. It's the funding of the military-industrial complex. That's what that whole scenario is about. Ukraine, just shortly after Zelensky was selected, rather than elected, just shortly after that, the DIA app was brought in, which is their digital ID. Between that small time frame, now 65% of eligible adults in Ukraine are now using that app to access government services, to get your driver's license, etc. So it seems to be a wee testing ground for that technology. The US aid were fundamental in a lot of the technology, and they have expressed that they want to take that abroad. So they have kind of a wee experiment going on there. I wouldn't want to be taking it to China. China do have a demographic problem, and that would make me think that India is quite possibly going to supersede China, as it will. India's kind of coming up to be the new China. But for China train their army, the US Army, they're pushing gender ideology and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's always a case of poor men fighting rich men's wars. And now we have the technology to get as much information as we possibly can. And we see what's happening in Ukraine, where they're literally taking young boys off the street to fight. The hospitals can't cope with the level of injuries, and they're leaving them on the battlefield because there's so many dead. Who's going to fight? Who's going to put up that, go in for that fight? For what? For money that they literally print out of nothing? Who's going to go and fight? We're too well informed now to buy into that. That's my hope.
Well, I'd hope so, but then I suppose there's always conscription. But I mean, the way things are going, I think if you took like 100 Americans who were joined the army in the last 5-10 years and 100 Russians and put them both in the field, my betting money would be on the Russians would absolutely destroy them, because they're tough people. It's a tough country. It's bloody freezing in winter. They're used to hardship. They don't have all this nonsense. Oh, I'm going to take a personal day because I feel a little bit funny. They are tough people. They haven't been kind of groomed into this pathetic softness, this feminization of men. I mean, it's a good thing that things change and that men maybe express themselves more. They talk about their feelings, but etc., which is a benefit. But the bad side of all this is that you've got a whole generation of young men who seem to be pretty pathetic, don't have any skills, and in an emergency situation, I don't think I want to rely on the 20, 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds of today, you know. So I think it's difficult. If they did go to war, I think I know who's going to win that. Sorry.
Men have been under attack. Men are so afraid to offend, and there's this idea of born this way and it's just the way I am. Unless you're a man, then you're not allowed to be born that way. You're supposed to be ashamed of being a man and toxic masculinity. They have to attack men first because men are historically the protectors. Women are the nurturers, men are the protectors. So men will rise up again because they're just repressed. It's not that they're not there anymore. It's in their nature, and they will rise up again. But that's where they're saying, hard times produce soft men, good times produce harder men. So there will be that come around. But men were attacked first, and now they're attacking women under the trans agenda.
Yeah, I mean, that really shocks me. I can't understand why any feminist would support that movement when you look at this new legislation, to be able to put men who just say, oh, my name's Veronica and I've got this wig on, and put them in a woman's prison, and then they're in there, doing terrible things. I'm not going to say the word, but you know what I mean. And that legislation will enable that to happen like automatically. You just have to self-declare that I'm this, I'm that. There's all things we'd love to be. I'd love to be James Bond, but I'm never going to be James Bond and drive around in this Aston Martin and go to different countries and got my that's kind of like a fantasy that people grown up with. I remember I had a James Bond pistol which fired little darts when I was like 7 or 8, and but I never believed I could actually be that. Now people are being told they can be a tree, they can be a dog, they can be a unicorn, or whatever the hell they want to be, which is how can that be beneficial for anybody's mental health to be encouraged to go down these roads?
But it's gender dysphoria. That's what it actually is. And we're talking about less than 0.5% of the population. And yet everybody is absolutely consumed by 0.5% of the population. So it's obviously not about that 0.5%. They don't care about that 0.5%. It's not about transgender, it's about transhumanism. They're moving into this idea. So it's if you can't say what a woman is, well, then that blurs the lines of what does it mean to be human? And that's where they want to go. There is such a progression in AI, and they want to put that forward. And then it's trauma. They're bringing it into the schools. They're trying to bring it into the schools. There is protest regarding that, and rightly so. Parents should not be allowing in any capacity another adult to sit and discuss something so overtly sexual with a child. Sex and sexuality is not on the radar of a child. They don't think about it. They don't need to know about it. Let them be children.
I totally agree with that. And, one thing the transhumanist agenda, I mean, if you look at the WF website, it's all very clear. It's very transparent, but of course, most people don't look. But, Aldous Huxley was talking about this back in the 50s and 60s. I read Brave New World, and I've watched some of the interviews he gave when he was an older man. And, very, very insightful. Everything that he predicted has come to pass. It's happening now. And I mean, I think his brother Julian had a bit of an inside track there, and that he was a transhumanist. Obviously, Aldous totally disagreed with him. And I think he tried to warn us. He was trying to warn humanity. 40, 50 years ago, he was trying to tell us this is coming down the road for you in the future, and hoping that people would listen. But I think, well, we've got to this point where we're nearly at the point where they're going to shut the door and turn the lock in the key. We're very close to that point now, I think.
Yeah, we are. for me, the digital ID is the last gate to rebel at. Once we accept a digital ID, that will move to biometric ID. That's it. We are in the prisons. Then it's a short walk to link it to CBDC. So digital ID and CBDC can't work without internet access and a phone. And you have to remember that with 3 billion people in the world, there have no electricity or spotty electricity. So this can't happen globally. They're trying to push that forward. So your phone then becomes your prison warden. So that's definitely something that people can do. I'm 48, so I lived probably most of my life without a phone. I was very resistant to get a phone to begin with. People need to cut the attachment to their phone. We want the technology without the enslavement. So turn off your notifications on your phone, because it's the intention is to constantly draw you in. Learn to leave your phone behind. Go for a walk and leave your phone behind. These catastrophes that we're afraid that if we don't have that, people can't get in contact with us are going to happen. They don't actually. They happen so rarely. It's fine. We all lived life before phones. So for me, that's one of the things that we were warned about, that we can actually step back from, because while it sounds great and UBI sounds great and the technology sounds great, it's never actually used to our benefit. It's always a method to further enslave us. And we are very close to it. And we have to put the phone down and go back to actually having a life experience. Even with, I have been working with Pay Local in the South. They're about to launch. It's a complementary currency, so it's encouraging you to keep things local, because we're not run by the government. The government doesn't make decisions for people. We're run by corporations. If BlackRock were a country, it would have the 3rd biggest GDP in the world, and China and America are ahead of them. So who's actually pulling the strings? It's corporations. And with the World Trade Organization from 1995, it was prior to that, but that's when it was started. They put their tentacles into absolutely every country with agreements and treaties that they now can go back and sue countries if they adopt policies that the corporations find offensive to their profit margin. So sidestep that, get back into local. If everybody sits back and thinks about how their parents lived and then how their grandparents lived, we're only 2 generations away from that. And life was so different. I think we need to put a halt on technology right now and assess where is this all going? Because we're moving away from the human experience into, they would like us just in the metaverse. It's not why we're here.
Well, I bought myself a sort of replica of my dumb phone. I had a Nokia builder's phone, which was virtually indestructible for years and years. Eventually, all the lettering wore out on the keypad because it had it so long, and you couldn't see what you were doing anymore. And I got a smartphone, which was like an iPhone 3, which was already a bit old at the time, and now I think I have an iPhone 8. It still works all right, but yeah, it's there all the time, sort of inviting you to kind of submerge yourself back into the digital world. Whereas the little simple Nokia, it's tiny. I think the only thing you could do on it is play Snake. It doesn't do internet. You can text, you can call, and that's it. And you can take out the battery off the back if you really want to, which is probably why so many criminals like them, because you can't be triangulated. If you take the battery out, you've just disappeared. So I suppose we may find, do you think we'll find that we'll have to have black spots where you have a digital life and then you just drop out of your digital life and back in? Or are you thinking more like you just don't have a digital life at all and you just sort of step out into the real world, as it were?
I think it's going to take quite a while for people to wake up, realize that they're in prison and rebel against it. The only hope that we have now is either like a solar flare, like the Carrington event that wipes everything out, all the electricity out. or for the crisis, the banking crisis to come, the real banking crisis to come before the reset, because I would anticipate that in order to usher us into central bank digital currency, if there's a crisis, we'll all run to the central banks because our money is safe in there, even though it's not our money. So that's the only hope. Other than that, it just seems that people are going to move into it, unless the more information that gets out, the more difficult it is. And people need to recognize if they are using a digital ID or not, and not move into biometric ID, because that's the steps. That's that, you know, you're getting in through the prison gate, you're getting in through the inner walls every time that you accept something like that. It's not necessary to participate in the world. We did just fine without it. It's not for your safety, it's for your surveillance and for your control.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I am well aware that, you know, Amazon is putting businesses out of business the whole time. You know, I went to a bookshop in Tralee and I was like, oh, that's a bit expensive. I thought maybe I'll buy it online. And then I turned around, walked back in and bought the book, because I thought, hang on, if everyone does this shop will cease to exist. They'll go bankrupt. All those people lose their job. It's like, you know, everything, the grocer, the butcher, you know, the small little bookshop, a little clothes shop, all these things. If we have to support these, otherwise we won't have like local businesses. I mean, Ireland's kind of unique in that way, in that so many towns are completely different. You go to one town and there's a whole bunch of privately owned shops, and then town 20 miles away, another bunch of privately owned shops, and they all have different stuff in them because because they're all owned by individuals and not corporate. Whereas I've traveled across Europe and whatever, and you could go to somewhere in the Netherlands, it's just like somewhere in you know, in the south of France, or it's just like somewhere in the UK mainland, or you know, they're all sort of like this sort of homogenized world of the corpocracy, where everything is just, your choices are so limited, and you know, you're just dealing with the machine, aren't you? Really, there's no humanity. No, you know, you don't get that. You walk into like some bookshop run by some old person, and they've been there for 50 years and they know everything about what they do. These corpocracies, they hire 18-year-olds who don't know anything about anything. You know?
Yeah, and the thing is, when you so say you go into a Starbucks locally, this is kind of the pay local concept. So you take your euros and you transfer them into pay local currency, and that encourages you to actually shop local. But say you go into Starbucks and at best they have a member of staff on. They're trying to work towards not even having that. So you go in there and you get a coffee. Well, the profits of that don't stay in your local communities. They go to head office, and then they're filtered through whatever Cayman Islands, tax havens, wherever they can get out of paying any tax back. So it's out of the community. When you go into your local coffee shop, that person lives locally. They employ people that are local. All of those people go out into the community and they shop local. So it's more likely to stay local. And the higher the velocity of money, you know, the lady in the coffee shop goes and gets a taxi to out to a restaurant, she gives it to the taxi driver goes and gets a local haircut. So the more times that money changes hand in an economy, the stronger the economy. So it's actually saving your local economy when you're doing that. And if you don't, you will lose it. And they have no idea how the rest of us live. We have no idea of the wealth that they have. We can't even get a concept of it, but they have no idea how we live. But if we don't shop local, we will lose our local shops, and then we'll have no choice. And freedom demands choice. And then you will have to go to their supermarkets, their shops there, and consume from them when we don't need to. We've been pushed into a consumer lifestyle. That's about to end either which way. The fiat currency, it might be reset to another fiat currency. That's what BRICS are kind of moving away from, that it won't be reset, it'll be backed. I don't know what the West is going to do, but the goal has to been, especially since we've come off the gold standard, to consume as much as possible to maximize profits. And the build quality has been reduced. That game is over. They need us to consume less. So life is going to change either which way. It can either be as billionaires dictate to us who have fun in controlling populations, or we can dictate what we think is a life experience and how we want to live and support our local community, the people that we actually deal with every day.
Yeah, I think we've really got to take our power back, because I suppose the main thing is making people aware of what this choice is, and then, you know, getting people to decide. Like, I mean, I worked in several things. I was in IT and finance, and I went into graphic design, and then I retrained as a horticulturist. So I actually know how to grow food really well now. So I've got that option. But I mean, the more things that you can do, that you can take care of yourself or in your community, then you really have some options. Whereas if your only skill is using an iPad, then you're kind of a bit screwed, aren't you? Because, you know, you relying on everyone else and relying on the system just to keep you going. And, you know, I think we got to move towards more self-reliance in all kinds of areas, because obviously I think even the most ignorant people, I think they know that corporations and government don't really care.
Yeah, well, the jobs that you would have thought would have been safe are now the ones that aren't safe, because now computers can code, and they're doing it faster and better. So the people that are coming out of university, unless they're moving into artificial intelligence, they're becoming redundant. As you said, if you can, the service industry, all the manufacturing moved towards China, what the East, and we're left with a service economy. So we haven't learned actually how to produce anything. And even with growing food, it's more difficult than you think. There's a lot more to it than you think, and you should have as many strings.
We're out of time, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry. We're going to get cut off any second now. So that's been really amazing, and thank you so much for coming on. That's been really insightful, and yes, some great advice for people as well. That's practical, because that's what I think people really need, the practical ideas about moving forward, because it's not just awareness, is it? You know?
Yep, it's be prepared, because if you don't know that something's coming at you, you don't